Johannes Iden and his teaching. The most important personality during the first phase of the Bauhaus was the painter and art theoretician Johannes Iden. Iden had been running his own private art school in Vienna when Gropius was introduced to him by Gropius's first wife, Alma Mahler, later Werfel. Iden had originally trained as a primary school teacher and only took up painting later on. He studied in Stuttgart under Adolf Hölzel, whose art and composition teachings exerted a profound influence upon him. Iden must have made an immediate impression on Gropius, since the latter invited him to speak on teachings of the old masters at the opening of the Bauhaus on March 21st, 1919, in the Weimar National Theater. On June 1st, 1919, Iden attended the first meeting of the Council of Masters, where it was agreed he should start teaching on October 1st, 1919. Iden's teaching will be the first to be discussed here since it soon became the backbone of Bauhaus education. Its influence was also to extend to activities in the workshops, where operations were only gradually getting underway. The pedagogical principle on which Iden's teaching was based can be summarized in a pair of opposites, intuition and method, or subjective experience and objective recognition. Iden often started his classes with gymnastic and breathing exercises to loosen up and relax his students, before seeking to create direction and order out of flow. The discovery of rhythm and the harmonious composition of different rhythms were among the recurring themes of his classes, which were divided into three main areas: studies of natural objects and materials, the analysis of old masters, and life drawing. The purpose of studying materials and natural objects was to bring clearly to light the essential and contradictory within each material, and thus to develop and refine his pupils' feelings for materials. Students were given several days to complete their tasks. Many years later, Bauhaus student Alfred Arndt gave a particularly illuminating and not ironic description of one such exercise. The results were very different. The girls produced small, delicate objects about the size of a hand. Some of the chaps came in with great 3-foot-high scraps. These were often real heaps of junk, covered in soot and rust. Others brought in single items such as logs, stovepipes, wire, glass, etc., and assembled them in the classroom. As always, Iden let the students decide which works were best. It was clear to all the students that Merkin Apol had won hands down. I can still see his horse today. It was a wooden board, part smooth and part rough, which had a paraffin lamp cylinder on top with a rusty saw through it, ending in a spiral. These sculptural studies were then drawn, with emphasis being placed on highlighting material contrasts and movement. Everyone was free to invent such plastic objects through drawing. Arndt later reconstructed the materials study he describes here. Two drawings of the same study also exist. In parallel with such subjective studies, Iden also taught theories of contrast, form, and color. Contrasts include, for example, rough smooth, pointed blunt, hard soft, light dark, large small, top bottom, heavy light, round square. Contrasts too taught a feeling for materials and were a preparation for workshop activities. Contrasts could be revealed in drawings of materials and natural objects, drawn with the help of form theories or illustrated as sculpture. Iden's theory of form took the elementary geometric shapes of circle, square, and triangle, and assigned to each a certain character. The circle was thus flowing and central, the square calm, and the triangle diagonal. Primary colors and basic shapes were concepts which proved particularly influential in the following years of the Bauhaus. Paul Klee, who attended one of Iden's lessons, quickly adopted them into his own teaching. For Kandinsky, who had already published his own thoughts on color theory in 1912 in Concerning the Spiritual in Art, They remained an indispensable part of his teaching, as will be seen below. The principles and criteria central to the study of materials and natural objects, contrast, form, and rhythm, also form the basis of the classes on analysis of old masters, which Iden both instigated and taught. Oscar Schlemmer provides a lively description of one such lesson. Iden gives analysis in Weimar, shows pictures which students then have to draw in terms of one or another essential, usually movement, line, curve. He then illustrates these in the example of a Gothic figure. Next, he shows the weeping Mary Magdalene from the Grunwald altar. The students attempt to extract some basic elements from the very complicated composition. Iden looks at their efforts and explodes. If any of them had any artistic sensitivity at all, then when faced by such a powerful depiction of weeping, the weeping of the whole world, rather than trying to draw it, they would simply sit down and burst into tears themselves, then walks out slamming the door behind him. The point was thus to experience works of art in their profoundness. When analyzing old masters, pupils could choose to concentrate upon the rhythm of a picture or its composition, its light-dark contrast, or its colors. The same was true of the third major area of the fine art curriculum, namely life drawing. Female models were used, although students often sat clothed for each other. These nude studies generally concentrate upon rhythm. True-to-life representations are the exception. What, therefore, was the particular value and significance of the preliminary course which Iden introduced at the Bauhaus? The training traditionally given to first-year students at conventional art academies and schools of arts and crafts consisted only of drawing set objects such as plaster figures, ornaments, and nudes. Students thus acquired most of their skills through copying. Iden, on the other hand, taught his students the fundamentals of color and form theory, composition, and design. The inspiration for what was then a new and modern style of teaching came both from the educational reform theories with which Iden was familiar and from the artists of the avant-garde. Iden's teaching was also aimed at the inner being. Students were to find their own rhythm and develop a well-tuned personality. Iden's influence on the early Bauhaus can be hardly overestimated. He not only organized and structured a preliminary course whose ideas are perpetuated, albeit modified over time, in many design courses today, he also, as we will see below, exerted a profound influence on activities in the workshops. As a master, Iden was greatly revered by his students. He wore a special Bauhaus-made outfit, as did many of his students, funnel-like trousers, wide at the top and narrow at the bottom, and a high-necked jacket fastened by a belt of the same material. Iden shaved his head so that his head is half schoolmaster, half priest. His glasses shouldn't be forgotten either. Some 16 to 18 of his Vienna students followed him to Weimar to continue their studies. These Viennese formed an influential group at the Bauhaus. The young painter Georg Musch, who joined the Bauhaus teaching staff in October 1920 to relieve Iden's workload, also attached himself to Iden's circle and became his friend and admirer. They later took it in turns to teach the preliminary course. Musch himself injected no new ideas into either practice or theory. Musch was at that time a disciple of Mazdaznan, a neo-Zoroastrian movement that had spread across Germany and with which Iden had become familiar since the 1910s. Mazdaznan prescribed a vegetarian diet, regular fasting, breathing exercises, sexual discipline, and numerous health regulations, all of which Iden followed with increasing dedication. In 1912, Iden and Musch together attended a Mazdaznan conference in Leipzig, the sect's German stronghold, and subsequently started making converts at the Bauhaus. Their aim seems to have been the official introduction of Mazdaznan at the Bauhaus. For some time, the Bauhaus canteen produced solely Mazdaznan fare, while Mazdaznan thought also began to filter into Bauhaus teaching. It had made several contributions to art magazines on the subject. One essay, arguing that the white race represented the highest level of civilization, even reflected a primitive form of racism. This perhaps explains the origin of his lithograph, House of the White Man. Bauhaus student Paul Citroën has left us the liveliest description of the Mazdaznan fellowship at the Bauhaus. Aiden had something demonic about him. As a master, he was either profoundly admired or by his opponents, of whom there were many, equally profoundly hated. Whatever else, it was impossible to ignore him. For those of us within the Mazdaznan circle, a special community within the Bauhaus, Eden had a very special aura. You could almost call him a saint. His presence practically reduced us to whispers, and our respect for him was overwhelming. Should he treat us in a friendly and relaxed manner, we would be enraptured and inspired. The Mazdaznan followers held gatherings of all kinds lectures, exercises, religious services, consultations, meals. There was an incredibly active striving for the common aim of perfection. Moosh and his wife, closely involved in our circle, took an active part in everything. After Iden's departure from the Bauhaus in 1923, according to Citroën, our group was effectively redispersed within the main body of students. Mazdazna no longer posed a problem at the Bauhaus. Iden was assisted not only by Georg Musche, but also by Gertrude Grunau, who, at Iden's request, had taught at the Bauhaus since the end of 1919. Iden had met Grunau, a music teacher, a few months earlier and had been astonished by the similarities in their thinking. Gertrude Grunau was initially employed as an assistant teacher. Her classes in harmonization were based on the belief that a universal equilibrium of color, music, perception, and form is anchored in each person, an equilibrium which can be rediscovered through physical and mental exercises. Like Eden, she believed that inner harmony was an essential precondition of human creativity. Grunow's most important teaching aid was a grand piano. Pupils were required to complete gymnastics and concentration exercises in individual lessons. Grunow advised her students on their choice of workshop and wrote a series of regular reports on the development of individual students. Her pedagogical emphasis, like Iden's, lay on the inner self. It involved working into the unconscious and out of the unconsciousness and was thus uncontrollable. One Bauhaus visitor described Grunau's classes thus: you close your eyes and after a short period of inner reflection, you receive an instruction either to imagine a certain color ball and to feel it by penetrating it with your hands, or to concentrate upon a note played at the piano. In less than no time, almost everyone is fully in motion, each in their own individual way. These movements are not rhythmical, a la Dalcroze. On the contrary, it is easy to distinguish the inhibited intellectuals from the relaxed types, the female nature from the male. The intellectualist, like an unredeemed soul, shuffles along with his hands in front of his eyes, while the redeemed soul moves with hands and legs in constant rhythm. One youth stands there, reaching energetically into the air, arm over arm, as if brick building. All the men have pushing movements directed upwards, while the women have enveloping movements directed toward the ground. To an observer, the expressive sign language of the women's hands is astonishing, a yearning search accompanying the rhythm of their bodies. What is the purpose of such exercises? They are paths to this discovery of natural elementary forms, and at the same time seek to create inner order in the individual, i.e., to encourage the regulating effect of external impressions upon the inner soul, so that the ordering powers of the intellect do not fall into temptation, that the ordering powers receive their inspiration from the soul within. When seeking new forms, we must allow these to be reborn in us from the totality of experience, from the oneness of nature and intellect. Our path is first irrational and then increasingly rational. Grunau's starting point was the teaching of the Swiss music teacher referred to above, Emile Jacques Dalcroze, who had practiced a form of rhythmic gymnastics which was new at that time in Dresden Hall. Grunau had developed the teaching method further. When the Bauhaus Constitution of January 1921 was reprinted in June 1922, one of its most important amendments concerned Grunau's harmonization classes. It now read, during the entire duration of study, practical harmonization classes on the common basis of sound, color, and form will be taught with the aim of creating a balance between the physical and mental properties of the individual. In the Bauhaus brochure of 1923, Grunau's harmonization teaching is assigned a central significance. Gropius adopted a number of its ideas in his introductory essay. In his conclusion, he even took harmonization thinking as the basis for a definition of the nature of the new Bauhaus. A new statics of the horizontal is beginning to develop, which seeks to counteract gravity through counterbalance. The symmetry of compositional elements diminishes as a logical consequence of the new teaching of equilibrium, which transforms the lifeless uniformity of mutually corresponding parts into an unsymmetrical but rhythmic balance.